on the go. Available in English and Mandarin and can be accessed via app, website, and print copy. We provide thorough, first-hand research-based findings on listed companies, economies, and stock markets, and clear perspective of how markets interact and how they influence investments, as well as provide Malaysian and global stock recommendations, stock portfolios with outstanding performance to follow. Subscribe now to iCapital for stock news. From only 49 ringgit a year, start investing like a fund manager. Subscribe now at www.icapital.biz. Are you tired of doing investment research on stock markets? Want to spend time on your hobbies or go out with your friends instead? Introducing iCapital, where you can get independent, objective, and comprehensive investment advice on the go. Available in English and Mandarin and can be accessed via app, website, and print copy. We provide thorough, first-hand research-based findings on listed companies, economies, and stock markets, and clear perspective of how markets interact and how they influence investments, as well as provide Malaysian and global stock recommendations, stock portfolios with outstanding performance to follow. Subscribe now to iCapital for stock news. From only 49 ringgit a year, start investing like a fund manager. Subscribe now at www.icapital.biz. Are you tired of doing investment research on stock markets? Want to spend time on your hobbies or go out with your friends instead? Introducing iCapital, where you can get independent, objective, and comprehensive investment advice on the go. Available in English and Mandarin and can be accessed via app, website, and print copy. We provide thorough, first-hand research-based findings on listed companies, economies, and stock markets, and clear perspective of how markets interact and how they influence investments, as well as provide Malaysian and global stock recommendations, stock portfolios with outstanding performance to follow. Subscribe now to iCapital for stock news. From only 49 ringgit a year, start investing like a fund manager. Subscribe now at www.icapital.
Hi, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Teng Boo from Capital Dynamics. Good to see you all again. Hope you had a good week. I noticed that we sometimes don't get that many comments when we do recording, so we thought that maybe today we try to do a live session and see whether we have more interaction, more comments. And also, the other reason is because of what is happening currently in the global context. The US, the America's bashing of China has continued and probably will get worse when Trump comes in. So in that kind of environment where the rivalry will probably get worse, I think it's important that the ordinary people like us, have some historical facts, have some perspectives as to how America became such a country. Was America like that all the time? And what were the factors that influenced the development of America? It's a big topic, but I will focus on topics that probably are left not often discussed because these are most of the time historical events, and people either don't read about them or have forgotten or are not even aware of such historical events. So I hope I had done 2 videos previously, one on America as a smuggler nation, and then last week on how the Chinese culture, the Chinese civilization influenced Europe through the Jesuits missionaries, where they translated a lot of the Confucian and other philosophers from China, their teachings into Latin, and then brought it back to Europe. And Europe, especially during the Enlightenment era, they went crazy over what was being practiced in China, what the philosophy was. So this week, we will show you the linkage between the Enlightenment and America, and how the founding fathers of America uh, copied, borrowed a lot of what they learned about the Chinese civilization and Confucianism, and use those principles, use those values, to use those technologies to build the foundation of a young country at that time, America. Now, before I proceed further, I'd just like to thank everyone for the support that you've given us throughout 2024. This will be the last YouTube video for 2024. Next week is a festive season all over the world, so I think I deserve a welcome break from the weekly videos. So there's no video next week, and we will continue with the first Saturday in January 2025. And for those of you who like to follow our activities, we have two events on Saturday, 11 January 2025. The first is the iCapital Roadshow, iCapital.bizberhad, our listed closed-end fund. We'll be having a kind of a interim roadshow. There's nothing to do with AGM and so on. It's just to update share owners as to what is happening after the DRP and what is the outlook for 2025. And then another event on the same day, 11 January 2025, the iCapital Fan Club fireside chat. We had a fireside chat in Johor Bahru and Penang recently, and we will be having one for KL on 11th of January. This is the fireside chat where we talk about investment lessons, investment mistakes, and so on. So please join us. I'm sure you find them very useful. So let's progress. Let's move on with today's topic. So I will share with you the historical records, the philosophical ideas, the technologies, and the innovations that American founding fathers borrowed and copied from China and transplanted into the young country at that time. It's a very fascinating story, and I hope it will help change how you look at the origins of United States and what the United States should be doing in the contemporary era. As I mentioned before, the founding fathers of America were heavily influenced by the European Enlightenment, right? And that era in Europe's history created a very dramatic shift in Western thought. Because before that, you have the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, where Europe generally were very backward. Then you have this Enlightenment, which it's called Enlightenment because it's like as if the Europeans discovered something totally new in terms of political thought, in terms of philosophy, in terms of way of life. And the Confucian principles had a very powerful impact on these Enlightenment philosophers, and by extension, the formation of the American political system. America's founding fathers learned about China, Chinese technology, Chinese culture, Confucianism through the studies of the European Enlightenment philosophers. And it is through this channel that the Chinese cultural and technological influence played a very important role in the creation of United States. Because at that time, the American founding fathers were looking for ideas and resources that could be transplanted into the young country at that time. So through careful examination, we have learned that although China is physically very far from North America, China and the Chinese civilization loom large in the minds of the founding fathers. As I mentioned, they were influenced in so many aspects, right? And don't forget, this is 17th, 18th century, as one of the most stable and successful civilizations at that time. China offered to the American founding fathers precious lessons and a lot of precedents, experiences that were very different from the founding fathers' European heritage. Benjamin Franklin wrote to Joseph Galloway, an American politician, his disappointment at the British Parliament. He told Galloway, "The general corruption and servility of the British Parliament is now generally seen and known to all the nation, that it is no longer respected as it used to be." Then Franklin listed some misconduct, including that Parliament censures are no more regarded than Pope's bulls. And Franklin afterward assumed that Parliament had been despised for its venality and abominated for its injustice. Who are the founding fathers? Some of them we have shown here: George Washington, first president; James Madison, the father of US Constitution; Thomas Jefferson, primary author of the Independence Declaration; John Adams, second president and leader of the American Revolution; Benjamin Franklin, America's most famous scientist and philosopher; Alexander Hamilton, founder and chief architect of the American financial system; John Jay, first Chief Justice of the United States. The list is longer than this, but I'm just sharing with you the more decisive founding fathers. So I find that I've read widely, and I find out this book, China and the Founding Fathers of the United States, has got a lot of interesting evidence that the founding fathers of America were influenced by many positive elements derived from the study of the Chinese culture and civilization. Right. So, if you like, you can buy this book. It's not too thick. It's about slightly over 200 pages. Right. And then, of course, there are a lot of other sources, but this is a very convenient source for you. Okay, Confucius and his works had been well known by the first half of the 18th century, that means from 17 to 1750, in the North America that was still a colony of Britain at that time. The writer, using Confucius' disciple as his pen name, wrote a concise history of Confucius, a famous Chinese philosopher, right? And then the guy that we show here, Jedidiah Amos, praised the works, the two works, as the most excellent precepts of wisdom and virtue, expressed with the greatest eloquence, elegance, and precision. In his word, Confucius is very striking and far exceeds in clearness the prophecy of Socrates. So at that time, you have Americans in different aspects of the society very impressed and very convinced with these great ideas from China. Franklin, in a letter to George Whitefield, advocated that knowledge of Confucian ideas could foster social tranquility. Thomas Paine wrote that Confucius, like Jesus Christ, was a great moral teacher. And James Madison even hung a portrait of Confucius in his house. So, when the founding fathers were trying to figure out what is the best way to build the nation, how to initiate the new nation, they discovered the values of Confucianism and adopted many of Confucian's social and political principles to build America's democratic system. After the victory of the American Revolution, the founding fathers took Confucian ideas and used them to build America's new political institutions. Noah Webster, known as the father of American scholarship and education, actually went even further. He went so far as to proclaim Confucianism as one of the most influential forces in the development of the US Constitution. which is why, at the beginning, at my uh, notice about this video, we purposely say that Joe Biden and Donald Trump should be listening to what we're saying, because they probably, Joe Biden, Donald Trump, or many other American politicians, don't even know the real roots of their democratic principles of their government system. This is another American again who says that Confucius was the most learned man that this or any other nation ever blessed with. Confucius was the original ultimate end of all things, that he is one supreme, holy, supreme, intelligent, and invisible. Thomas Jefferson was so impressed that sometime between 1801 and 1809, he saved an ancient Chinese poem from the Book of Odes, right, which Confucius had edited. And in this personal scrapbook of Jefferson, there's this poem about an ideal Chinese prince that was recommended by Confucius. You can see, for example, the house of James Madison, the Montpelier, the one on the left-hand side. Even in such a place, you could see that the hero worshipping, the admiration, the following of Confucius was very deep, because in his house, James Madison displayed a portrait of Confucius. And Thomas Paine, also another one of the American early founders, considered Confucius to be in the same category as Jesus Christ and Socrates. As I mentioned earlier, Jefferson was the principal author of the US Declaration of Independence. He promoted Confucius' moral principles in his inaugural speech in 1801. That's incredible. I mean, I'm not sure whether current American politicians are aware of this influence that China had on the beginnings of America. Benjamin Franklin introduced this notion of Confucian moral cultivation in a series of articles. There's a newspaper at that time called the Pennsylvania Gazette. So he would write extracts from the Morals of Confucius, and publish in this Pennsylvania Gazette. And the Confucius work, the way Benjamin Franklin looked at it is like that Confucius' teachings reflected his own efforts in him purifying his morals and to help his fellow Americans enhance their virtuous characteristics. So Franklin was trying to model his personal behavior on the teachings of Confucius. So recent scholarship found that Franklin published Confucius' teachings due to the fact that Confucian thinking was related to Franklin's own efforts to establish a personal code of conduct. This is based on his autobiography, right? And in his autobiography, Franklin listed 13 virtues that he thought were the most important, that would contribute to his rise from a low-class American to a world-famous individual. The 13 virtues were temperance, silence, order, resolution, frugality, industry, sincerity, justice, moderation, cleanliness, tranquility, chastity, and humility. But the one thing that was missing was charity. That means the love of one's fellow person. Now, this one virtue was left out, right? And according to Professor Edmund Morgan, he explained why this virtue was left out. Professor said that by exhibiting it conspicuously in his own life, while making no pretension to it. He was perhaps affirming to himself the superiority of a moral perfection that has nothing to do with Christianity, which is Confucianism. So Franklin told his readers that he checked his own personal behavior, his own code of conduct each day of the week. And he made sure that he followed the 13 good virtues that he has listed down. John Adams recommended to the President of US Congress that the United States should follow China's example, saying that the British system of colonies in distant regions for the purpose of monopolies was at an end. I only hope that the current American politicians were to listen to this advice. And Thomas Jefferson, whose vision of a prosperous country has to be based on agriculture. At that time, don't forget there's no industrialization yet. So a prosperous country is one that is based on successful agriculture, right? Thomas Jefferson shared Adams' vision that the United States should follow the Chinese model. And if you follow the Chinese model, you can see at the bottom of the quotation, then we would avoid wars and all our citizens would be husbandmen. That will be how peaceful and prosperous the country and the world would be. The first Chief Justice of Michigan told James Madison that the Chinese are virtuous, orderly, pacific, and benevolent people. In this scenario, he says the US should start an establishment of American youth for the purpose of learning their language, Chinese, Mandarin. And imagine, when China set up Confucius Institute across America, the American politicians turned it into a racist kind of anti-China campaign. Thomas Paine regarded China as a source of inspiration and innovation. And Arthur Lee, another American politician, told Franklin the same thing, that both of them agreed on their admiration for the Chinese government. Franklin was so impressed with the effectiveness of the statistic system of the Chinese imperial court, or the Chinese system. And he wrote to Thomas Percival, an English physician, and you can tell that Franklin was impressed by the fact that the Chinese provincial authorities had accurate information on the population in China and the quantities of provisions produced. So under the influence of the European physiocratic thinking, Thomas Jefferson wanted to borrow the idea, the system that China's land tax was built upon. And Dupont said that he respected the Chinese system. He called it a great improvement on the general system of the tithe. So you can see the respect, the admiration was from philosophy to very basic fundamental administrative system. And the other thing that American founding fathers were impressed is that Confucian philosophy will teach you how to be virtuous, how to lead through virtuous behavior instead of just basing on law. And in this case, Thomas Paine listed Confucius' principles at the bottom. Thou shalt make a covenant with thy senses, with thine eye, that it beholds no evil, with thy ear, that it hear no evil, with thy tongue, that it speak no evil, with thy hands, that they commit no evils. Then Charles Thomas, Secretary of the Continental Congress, and which is later became the US Congress, emphasized the sophistication of Chinese industry. Chinese industry meaning, well, this is before Industrial Revolution, yeah. And the American Philosophical Society told the American people if they could introduce the industry, that means the hardworkingness of the Chinese, the arts of living, and improvements in husbandry, meaning like agriculture, America might become in time as populous as China. So, in other words, this was 1768. This is about 280 years ago. They could foresee that if America were to copy and model themselves a lot on what the China's government was doing at that time, America will become prosperous. This is how America became great. I mean, one of the major reasons why America became great in that 200 odd years. Franklin was eager to borrow practical and valuable technologies from China. He really looked at a lot of things. He was very interested in silk production in China. I mean, silk production in China is, of course, world class, even at that time, even now. And Franklin also explored the use of Chinese windmills. He was fascinated. And he was also curious. He wanted to learn how the Chinese tea was preserved all the way from China when it was being transported to North America and, I mean, via Europe. This tea was well preserved, dry, and still crisp, although it comes all the way by sea in a ship which is damp at the bottom. So he wanted to understand the technology because he felt that this technology could be used to preserve grains. And Franklin also turned to Chinese tofu. As I mentioned earlier, Franklin was mesmerized by the Chinese silk industry. And silkworms were first imported to Virginia as early as 1613, but at that time, although silk was treasured and valued and all, it was not really produced in United States or in America at that time. So he even wrote an essay titled Memoirs of the Culture of Silk, and he published it in his Pennsylvania Gazette. So he says, he gave you history, blah, 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 right? And 1740, the culture of silk began in America. And those of you, there's this famous kite experiment that Franklin was supposed to have done to discover electricity, where he flew up a kite during a thunderstorm. And what is interesting is that kite that Franklin used for his electricity experiment, the kite was made of a silk handkerchief, and the string was a silk string. It's important for his experiment. And when it was needed, he would turn to Chinese military strategy and learn from them. He also explored Chinese heating technology, how the Chinese could heat their houses during the cold winters in a very, very efficient way. And he not only copied the Chinese technology, but using that as a base, he invented his own Pennsylvania fireplace. Yeah. And then he used traditional Chinese medical theory as a guide when he renovated his stove. Franklin was impressed by Chinese navigation technology. He was studying carefully Chinese ship construction and how the Chinese would have compartments so that the ship doesn't sink easily. And he also researched on Chinese knowledge on rowing a boat. So he was not just contented with European paper manufacturing because he knew that they came from China. He studied in detail the procedures, the techniques, and equipment that the Chinese workers used to make paper. So the scope, the extent of Franklin's borrowing from Chinese technology, Chinese invention was very broad, really broad, from daily things like candles, vinegar, to silk production, to heating, to ship construction, and so on. That's why Franklin is really very respected in America as a brilliant inventor, a brilliant scientist, and a marvelous philosopher. Thomas Jefferson employed the Chinese practice to develop his own clock. A letter from Jefferson to Benjamin Franklin revealed that Jefferson made use of the Chinese gong. As you can see, right, the Chinese gong. So Jefferson used the Chinese gong for calling people together. And porcelain manufacturing. The founding fathers understood that porcelain manufacturing was essential to national economic self-reliance because the Chinese porcelain, like tea, had been a major import from the colonial master at that time, Britain, and they wanted to reduce the dependence on imports from Britain. So they built their own. The American China Manufactory is a porcelain factory in Philadelphia and became known for its quality. But more importantly, because of this factory, it was able to challenge Britain's monopoly of porcelain and indirectly contributed to the colonists' struggle for independence from Britain. George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, Gouverneur Morris were inspired by the Grand Canal of China. Grand Canal of China is the longest canal in the whole world. It's much, much bigger than Panama Canal, much, much bigger than the Suez Canal. And this Grand Canal innovation influenced the construction of the Erie Canal, connecting New York to the Midwest America. And because of that, the New York City grew and developed rapidly. Surprisingly, or not surprisingly, the Great War fascinated the American leaders. I mean, this part sounds a bit like as if they're thinking a bit like Donald Trump. But for George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, they also wanted to have a war for their own safety. And they tried to promote a construction of such a wall in the young America at that time. So during the French and Indian War, 1754 to 1763, Franklin recommended this concept of the Great Wall and maintained that building an American Great Wall was the most efficient way to protect the 13 colonies. And the influence doesn't just stop there, it also influenced American architecture. Chinese influence on American architecture came through Europe in the early 18th century. So residents in America built their houses with Chinese trim, and others adopted a style known as Chinese Chippendale. And then even if you look at the last paragraph, there was an advertisement in the South Carolina Gazette in 1757, shows that at that time, some Americans had used Chinese style design as a great attraction to potential buyers. I mean, we can't see clearly, but that was the advertisement. And then the houses and gardens, a lot of them were copied based on Chinese design, Chinese architecture. Monticello is considered as one of the greatest architectural treasures in the United States. And Jefferson considered Monticello his architectural ideas and experiments. So, what is so special about this? Jefferson made Chinese railings as a recurrent motif in his Monticello. In his main building, Jefferson adopted the Chinese architectural style, making drawings of Chinese lattices for houses in various places. As you can see on the right side, the one right at the top, very similar, right? And the vast numbers of memos dealing with temples indicate Jefferson's deep interest in the aesthetic styles of Chinese architecture. Now, Jefferson using Chinese architecture was not just cannot be seen just at the superficial level, because Jefferson deemed architecture as the heart of the American Revolution cause. It's not just about building a wall and so on and so forth, because for him, constructing a building was similar to building a nation. For him, the architecture of any American building should convey the American desire to break cultural as well as political ties to Europe. So they wanted to pursue a political destiny separate from America, from Europe. So this was the consensus among the founding American politicians. And who do they look to? China and Confucius and many other things. And don't forget, at that time, China's civilization was the most advanced in the world. So Jefferson wanted to make a new nation in America rather than just a replica of a European country. As the principal writer of the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson's formation of the new style with Chinese architectural features captivated many Americans. Can you imagine? Put yourself 250 years ago, 270 years ago. Suddenly, you have this architecture will look so different from what you know in England and Europe. And then, what about maritime trade? Americans' trading success began with the Empress of China. Not only was it profitable, very profitable, it contributed to America's international economic and political ascendancy. The US-China trade was supported heavily by a lot of American businessmen and political parties. And there was huge domestic demand within America for Chinese products. By 1795, only about 10 years after the Empress of China is the first ship that sailed from America to China. So a bit more than 10 years after Empress of China sailed to China, the United States had already surpassed all the European powers except Great Britain in its volume of Chinese trade. That's how lucrative it was. That's how important it is. And the Chinese trade, the US-China trade, helped to change America's political map, moving much of American political power from Virginia, where the plantations were, to New York City and New England, the new political centers of North America. It was not the US-China trade was not just something supported by a single businessman. It was a joint effort by the founding fathers, by literally all of them. Educational system. Thomas Jefferson sought to apply two of Confucius' core educational principles, meritocracy and universal education, to to a system at that time which was European-centric, which emphasized the classics, and an education system that was unstandardized. So Thomas Jefferson, wanted to break away from that. So because of this pioneering efforts by Jefferson in America, Thomas Jefferson became known as a founding father of public education in America and the founding father of democratic education. So by drawing the elements, the positive elements from Confucian educational principles, Thomas Jefferson revolutionized the American educational system. As I mentioned earlier, right, the Empress of China came back from China in 1785, and then they're saying that the people who were on the trip said that the Chinese were kind to our people and glad to see a new source of commerce open to them from a new people, as they called the Americans. So facing British sanctions after the Revolutionary War, US political leaders initiated efforts to build direct economic connections with China. So you see how history repeats. Britain imposed sanctions on the young America at that time, and America had to look for other trading partners, which at that time meant China. Now, America imposed sanctions on China, so China will look for trading partners with ASEAN countries, with Latin America, with Africa, and so on. But don't forget, these sanctions were applied by Britain on America a few hundred years ago. And it was the trade with China that saved the young American country at that time. And the young America, like I said, was before Industrial Revolution. So it was basically an agrarian society. So the founding fathers turned to China because China was a country, a nation with very successful agriculture, and to learn from them their farming techniques, and found out that the Chinese agriculture was so far advanced, so ahead of all of them, because according to Chinese farming experience, you can have perpetual fertility compatible with uninterrupted succession of crops. Because the Westerns, the Europeans and Americans and the British people, their notion is different. Their notion of agriculture is that the soil, the land must have a rest. Then only you can plant again. But the Americans, the founding fathers, learned from the Chinese. James Madison, he told the members of the Agricultural Society of Albemarle that the Chinese would laugh at the idea that the land needs to rest, as if, like animals, that it has a sense of fatigue. So the Chinese says, no, it does not need to rest, because you can make use of fertilizing principle, right? That can contribute towards replacing what have been drawn from it. That is revolutionary. For now, you might think it is a piece of cake, but don't forget, the Europeans, the Westerners, and Americans never had this notion at all, whereas the Chinese were using it for thousands of years. So they had to borrow all these methods, these concepts, these experiences from the Chinese civilization. And James Madison said that civilization is never seen without agriculture, right? So you must have both, otherwise the country cannot succeed. And he regarded China highly because he understood there was a much higher state of agriculture in China than in many other countries, far more advanced in the improvements of civilized life. You can see the others, William Jarvis, all said more or less the same thing. So using virtue, personal virtue, to check public officials. Again, John Adams, right? He was known to discuss the nature and application of Confucian governmental principles. John Adams was not satisfied with the English translation of Confucius. He would instead read the original Latin translations, those from Matteo Ricci, the Jesuit priest. And John Adams, James Madison shared Franklin's respect for Confucius' governing principle, specifically respect to the purpose of government and the importance of virtuous leaders. One of Jefferson's most important contributions to the formation of American democratic institutions was his promotion of Confucian moral value for the leaders. So Jefferson aspired, he himself, like Franklin, aspired to be the type of virtuous leader that Confucius held on a pedestal. Jefferson was so influenced by Confucius' emphasis on virtue that during his presidency, he included an ancient Chinese poem in his personal scrapbook. This poem was taken from The Great Learning. Now, what is this all about? The Great Learning of Ta Xue is significant because it expresses many themes of Chinese philosophy and political thinking, and has therefore been extremely influential both in classical and modern Chinese thought. Government, self-cultivation, and investigation of things are all linked. It links together individual action in the form of self-cultivation with higher goals such as the ultimate world peace, as well as linking together the spiritual and the material. So Thomas Jefferson was obviously super impressed. Then the Chinese merit system, right, where it was designed based on Confucian political philosophy to make sure that you have competent governance and sustainable governance. This system recruited government officials based on merit rather than on familial or political ties. In other words, you're born into a king monarchy, therefore you get promoted, or because your family is an aristocrat or whatever it is. So it's by birth rather than by merit and competency. So this Chinese merit system is truly the world's first democratic systems. How did this influence the young America? The founding fathers were alarmed at the promotion. The Americans wanted to form a society of Cincinnatus, where this society will be based, admission to this society will be based on the traditional European monarchy feudalistic type. But Franklin and the founding fathers were alarmed, were scared by this hereditary elitist type of system that is reminiscent of European aristocracy. Instead, they endorsed the Chinese civil service system based on merit-based promotion that will reward those with talent and education. So the rest is repeating the same thing. Franklin enunciated that the United States should follow China's system of promotion, for the system is therefore useful to the United States as it encourages parents to give their children a good and virtuous education. It's incredible because the European system is the opposite. The Chinese system is ascending, the European system is descending. We call it descending honor, allowing promotion based on your familial ties and your ancestors' ties, and so on and so forth. So, this adoption of the Chinese meritocracy system is a game changer for the young country at that time. So, not just for Franklin, but for the other founding fathers, the Chinese system of social promotion gave an opportunity for all Americans with talent and education, right? Instead of divine right, instead of a system of inequality based on the European feudalistic method. So this notion of meritocracy took root and became very established. That's why you see America up to now. It's a place where if you're capable, you're able, you're willing to work hard, you can succeed. Don't forget, Europe was not like that for a greater part of the European history, including Britain, right? John Adams, the same thing. He also opposed the formation of the Society of Cincinnatus, based on the same reason. And the others, John Jay, Thomas Jefferson, all supported this meritocratic system. Got a bit tongue-tied there. So they wanted to make sure that this system is established in America and not the outdated, the unequal European system. The same thing, because that society was to form an order of hereditary knights. That was totally wrong. So this is about the same point about meritocracy. It was only in 1884, which is not that long ago, the US Congress passed the Pendleton Act, or also known as the Civil Service Reform Act. This act initiated a long overdue reform of the US civil service system. The passage of the Pendleton Act marked the US federal government's embracement of the Confucian merit system. Finally, but not too late, because by 1884, America was just about 100 years old. So a quick summary of this section, right, is that whether it's Franklin, Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and others, they were the staunchest advocates of the Confucian principles of political meritocracy. And through the efforts of the founding fathers, Confucius' political ideas, moral philosophy, joined the intellectual force of European Enlightenment to reform the public institutions in the young country, and therefore build a foundation for American democracy. I mean, I'm summarizing a lot of the principles, a lot of the thoughts, a lot of the linkages, because it's a big topic, but I hope so far you've been able to see the cause and effect, the linkages, and so on. So let me take a look and see whether we have any comments, any questions. So, okay, thank you for sharing about the Confucian teaching. Every day I'm condemning America, a bit biased, appreciate talk about other topics. I'm not every day condemning America, not a bit biased, because I have to say this, because if I don't say this, you probably won't get it from anywhere. You probably listen to the Western media, the Western press, the Western politician, which is every day anti-China. Not only a bit biased, but totally biased and totally not fact-based. What I'm saying are all fact-based. I take the trouble. Like I said, you can read the book for yourself if you want to. And this person also taught at he's a Chinese, but he teaches at American University, including University of Arizona. So if the Western press, if the Western politicians can be less anti-China, can be less unfair about the rest of the world, then maybe I don't have to do things like that. I have to say things like that, again, based on research, to give another view, Because if you only know what is black and you don't know what is white, then you wouldn't know what black is. So the whole idea of this is to make sure that people like us don't get jaundiced views of the world. The world is not seen. The world, the real world, is not like what the West portray it to be. So if I'm anti-America, that's because there are too many unjustifiably pro-American narrative out there, which nobody go and criticize, which nobody go and research and see whether it's right or wrong. And this talk I have is part of a series, as I explained to you when I started part one. How America became great. You listen to Trump, you listen to Biden, you listen to Marco Rubio, you listen to Mike Pompeo, you listen to Peter Navarro. All of them will tell you that it's as if America is great. Come on. Where did you get your greatness from? And if you know where you get your greatness from, then you will be a lot less arrogant, a lot less ruthless in the way you deal with other people, with other countries. So I hope that we have more people speaking up and giving what I say may not be the truth, but at least I've given a counter view. And is it true that the American politician 200 odd years ago had a portrait of Confucius in his house? Can you imagine Donald Trump or Joe Biden having a portrait of Confucius in their house? You can't imagine that. But they've forgotten. They thought that they are great because of whatever narrow-mindedness that they have. It's like Mao Zedong used to say, don't be like a frog in the well. If you are the frog at the bottom of the well and you look up to the sky, you only see the little sky. So the frog has to come up from the well and look at the whole world. So don't be a frog in the well. I think that's the purpose of what we're trying to do. And the more we share the alternate narratives, because you cannot get this from the Western media. I should have maybe shared this experience that I had when Prabowo went to China, the first visit. The Australian Financial Review, AFR, which is supposed to be a respected Australian financial publication, the big headlines that Prabowo's visit to China is a shambles, that why is Prabowo signing away the sovereignty rights of Indonesia? But if you look at the Indonesian press, which I do, the Indonesian media reported it totally differently. It wasn't a shambles. It was a success by Prabowo. That it's better to have 1,000 friends than to have one enemy. So if you listen to that, if you read the AFR headlines and the article, you say, oh my goodness, how pro-China Prabowo is. How stupid Prabowo is. That's not correct. That's only the Australian Financial Review's narrative. And of course, you know who owns AFR and you know who owns the Western media. So if we don't take the trouble to get different views, even though when they totally disagree with you, totally disagree with what you know, if you don't take the trouble to find out, then you will not know what is anti and what is pro. Unfortunately, it takes a lot of work. So I hope that whatever we do here, like I said many times before, we don't just say it out like that, we take the trouble. The first book I showed, Smuggler Nation, and then I showed you the interactions between the European Enlightenment with the Chinese civilization. Was that falsehood? No. It is based on a lot of the diaries, the writings of Matteo Ricci, and a lot of the Jesuit priests at that time. And here again, I'm basing it on something that has been seriously researched, and they give you the sources. It's not as if the person writes without any kind of references. This is not social media. This is a real book. This kind of book, the in the world of published books, you don't have fake news because you have to show your name, you have to show your credentials, and before the publisher can publish you, has to check whether it's done properly, and then it has to have be peer review. Then only you get to publish the book. And when it's published, then at least you know who is the publisher. Not like social media. Social media, you can put a fake name and then you can say whatever you want and nobody knows. So this is different. There is an existential threat of nuclear war between America and China. If more people understand the underlying issue, then hopefully this will not happen. Well, okay, that's a view, that's a comment. Nevertheless, I will to help you, because this is part two of part two. Last week was part one of part two, where we showed the Jesuit priests transferring Confucian Chinese civilization to Europe. This week we're showing you how America founding fathers got these ideas from the European philosophers, European people at that time. So next week, not next week, the next YouTube video, I'll share with you again aspects of what made America great, which most people are not aware of. Again, it has to be research-based and fact-based. So I will wrap up with a simple animation of the part one and part two of what I've said this week and last week. I hope you will stay with us next year, share whatever we have shown you, and comment as much as you can. And then if you have not subscribed, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. So with that, I'll see you next year, and have a happy new year, have a good break, and stay safe. Bye-bye.
Are you tired of doing investment research on stock markets? Want to spend time on your hobbies or go out with your friends and